Hi everyone, Susan Corbett, custom machine quilter. It's important to have what I call a playbook, a bunch of motifs you're familiar with that will go really quickly when you want to go quickly. This quilt started out as a way to use up scraps and turned into something else completely. So I intended for this to be quilted very quickly, and some parts were fast and some parts were really slow. But I think it turned out great, and I'm pretty happy with these results. This began life as a medallion. It was only supposed to be this little quilt, the star with a few borders, and it was going to stop right here. And then, and that was a pattern by Kathleen Tracy. You can find that on her Facebook page, on her website, her Etsy store, if you like it. It occurred to me, look, I have a red and blue and gold color scheme happening here, and that would make a wonderful Quilt of Valor. So I started adding on. So the star up at the top was the star block was one of Kathy's patterns as well. This beautiful border print was the very last of that piece I had, and there wasn't enough to frame the whole medallion, so I made some square blocks and put those at the bottom because I think they take up more visual weight. And I computer quilted some stars in the middle and ditch quilted around each patch, all around it. I used a blue thread for all of those, so some are going to show up more than others. I was most excited about the great big empty triangles. I specifically went out and bought a solid fabric because I wanted to do some showy quilting in there. And long story short, I ran across this eagle motif. I think it's really beautiful. So I computer quilted that in there, and then I had to figure out what to do with the resulting triangle points. I had thought I'd find a great big eagle whose wings are spread out. When I saw this pattern, I just kind of quit looking and abandoned that plan. In part because I didn't want to spend all week quilting this one quilt. So the same stars that I put in the square blocks, I reprised out there and then did some radiating lines emanating from the backgrounds of those, and I think that looks really great. I love it. So the thread here is a contrasting thread. You want to use a different color thread, a darker thread in this case, when you really want to feature the design. And I did. So the eagle, that whole eagle motif is in that rich dark gold, and so is the star, and the background quilting is in a matching thread, because those lines are going to show up no matter what color you put them in. But that's background quilting, so I wanted to keep the color in the background as well. So that same color I used to quilt the eagle in, I also used here in the pieced borders. This background fabric here, which I know most people would not consider as a background fabric, but that's how my mind works, that had been backing for a quilt I made a couple years ago. And I thought that would make a great border for this quilt that was going in this gold direction. And I wanted to put something in there I mean, I could have left it blank and just filled it up with quilting, and that would have been fine. I was flipping through a book and I found this border, which I thought would look really great. So this book is a nice mix by Gerry Kimmel. It's a older book, but I love that whole style. And I just thought this was a really good idea, so I went for it. So I hand-appliquéd all those. And that went so much faster than I thought it was going to. It was a lot of fun. This past year or so, I've really been into handwork. I've stepped up the embroidery and the applique and the hand quilting. And so that's just kind of how that came to be. Okay, after I stabilized the quilt, it occurred to me, let's put a block design right in the middle of that star. And so I found one that I thought was pretty good. This isn't exactly a patriotic design, but I like the way it moves. And it's kind of like, I don't know, fireworks, maybe? I thought it would work in that star. I like it. The computer did it. One of the things I like about it is, see where it's hitting the points. Nothing was really sticking up too bad. I don't like indiscriminate quilting where you've got intersections that just pop up. So I really like that, but it's a circular design. So it left those corners empty, which is fine, no big deal. I went back, I put some clear thread back in and ditch quilted around here because it was sticking up in a most unattractive way, but that's fine. And then so I'm gonna have to go back and do something with that patch, and that will come. You know, you stand there at the machine and the ideas pop into my head later. And so I thought, as long as I've got the clear thread in there, let's go after this beautiful old piece of Moda. This is the very last of it that I have. I had enough for 2 sides of that border, and I've just pieced another side of the border, you know, design challenge. I like the soft blue. That helped give rise to the whole design scheme of this, the color scheme of this quilt. So what I did here was, I started here and was doing this. And then I thought, well, how am I going to quilt that middle? So I've just gone to that center square and I outlined that. I'm not using a ruler. You can see how it's free-handed. Using a ruler is going to be really slow. Free-handing it is going to go really fast. So, I don't know, does that little line bother anybody? I don't think you're going to see it. But it's a way to connect all the quilting, get in there and get out and get that quilted pretty quickly. Had I used matching thread, then I'd be slowing the whole process down, worrying about hitting the line, and it just wasn't worth it. So I did that on both sides. And then I thought, well, do I want to match the gold right in here or not? So I've outlined both of those parts in the clear thread as well. I will change the thread color, thread type, and quilt along those lines. So one part that I did not record is that first little frame after the medallion. I did a big loop meander in there because it was going to go really fast, and it did. I made it big and fat and round, and it fills up the space really nicely. There's a gazillion ways to do a loop meander, and I'm still discovering what all those ways are. So in this little pieced border, it's just a bunch of little square scraps. I'm doing continuous curve, once again, because it's quick. Really, I flew through the quilting of this quilt. You know, this is not paid work, and I have a really long waiting list at the moment, and I needed to get a move on. But I wanted to get this quilt done. I was excited about it, and I like to work on things when I'm excited about them. So just continuous curve from one point to the next. See the sequence here. I'm quilting up and down the squares, but hugging that one side, if that makes any sense. And once all that quilting is in there, then I'll go back and fill in the other side. A word about thread. I used a polyester thread by Superior called Omni in the center motif. The color is called Cookie Dough, which I love. It's just it's you know, it's a buttery sort of almost yellow. And in the next border and the one after this, I used So Fine. I think it was, I'm not sure what the color of it is called. And in this border, I switched to some other kind of beige. So there were several thread changes throughout this quilt, not that many. Here's a look at the next border. I chose to do a finger feather here. Because as I say, I was trying to get this done ASAP, and I knew this would look pretty good in here. Feathers always show up, even on a busy fabric like this one. They look so pretty. This is fun to do. After you've done it 4 million times, it just goes really fast, and it's really satisfying to do. And I've shown this in greater detail in some other videos. One of the things I like to do here to speed things along even more is to quilt both sides of this spine as I'm going. A little bit here, a little bit over there, so I'm not having to make 2 passes, only 1. The next border out will be this beautiful border print. By this point, I'd already quilted, I don't know what you call those. The part of the fabric to the right of the part I'm doing now, which I quilted with clear thread. And while I had that in there, I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and freehand outline the border print here. This went so fast and I was so happy about it. At some point in here, I don't think I have anything showing the quilting of the star, but the star up there at the top was ditch quilting and continuous curve, and that's it. I ditch quilted with clear and did the continuous curve with a darker thread that I think I used to quilt the pieced borders. So just look how fast that's going. Huge payoff for so little work, and it makes the border print a feature that's even more gorgeous than it already is. Just in case you're wondering, this is all one piece of fabric. And there was more border print to it. This has just been cut down. That's the last of it. On this next border, I decided to use the pacing as an indicator of how I was going to quilt this. I wanted a design that would go really quickly. Cross-hatching does not usually come to mind, but I could use the sizes of the pieces to dictate how big those increments would be. I did not overthink it for once. I just hauled off and did it. And at a certain point, it occurred to me, some of these patches are much longer, and it would make for an awkward, super long crosshatch that just wouldn't be enough quilting. So I did opt to do a tiny bit of measuring and make some smaller cross hatches. Had this been a show quilt, I would have been stopping and carefully measuring, and I might have done something else. But this was pretty expedient, and I'm not unhappy with how it turned out. It's totally fine. I could have done the same thing on that outer border, but this is me we're talking about here, and that would have been boring. So I picked a whole different design for over there. All right, on to the big border, the appliquéd one. Well, let's see. I was using So Fine Beige. That's a rich looking color. There was going to be more quilting here than anywhere else on the quilt. So that's when I want a light thread, lightweight. So it's So Fine is pretty skinny, works really well. So I was quilting the background and quilting the leaves and stars as I went along. There were quite a few stops and starts here out of necessity. And when I started quilting this, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I knew feathers would be involved and some leaves, of course, but I wasn't sure. I just kind of let it happen, which I think is a good way to go some of the time. I put points in the star and then ground in that middle part to give that some dimension. It would be a mistake to leave that star unquilted. And then, I took a few liberties getting around, but it doesn't really call that much attention to itself. So feathers and tendrils and leaves and curls, the usual bag of tricks, just whatever intuitively felt right at the moment. This was fun. This took more time than I thought it was going to. Doesn't it always? Yes. When you're custom quilting, it does always take longer than you think it's going to. But I think it turned out great. And I think I quilted more heavily than I had planned to in the beginning. I think just out of habit. I don't like sparse quilting. But this was heavier than it needed to be. Now, based on past interactions with clients over the years, not just clients, but people I see at quilt shows and guild meetings and stuff, I know there are some people out there who are puzzled. Why did you create this border out of gold and not green? Maybe the stars are good in gold, but don't the stems and leaves need to be green? No, I don't think so. That would be great, but I didn't want another color in the design scheme. The rationale for this quilt was for it to be a Quilt of Valor and maybe for a gold star family, which is how I ended up with this star pattern in the first place. I think providentially, the universe showed me that star border because it was appropriate for this quilt. So why not go with the gold? Introducing another color on top of the print in this border, I think would have just made it way more busy. With this much pattern and color happening, I thought it would be a really good idea just to keep it monochromatic. The tone of the entire quilt is pretty soft. Even with all the red in there, it isn't jarring. It's a pretty soft quilt. So I like it. I think it's different, and I love things that are different because, I love custom. I don't want a quilt that 40 million people have. I want uniqueness. To me, that's where it's at. And one more thing about this border, I took the time to stabilize this border before I began doing any of this kind of quilting. All the stems and leaves and stars are outline quilted, really close to the edge for stability. And they look a lot better that way. I know a lot of quilters would just haul off and do all the showy part without doing any kind of stabilizing at all. And I think that's pretty awful.
I was explaining to a client one time why I do that. I have an example quilt here in my quilting room of, here's some applique that's not stabilized, and here is some that is. And she said, so that's why at a quilt show, I see a quilt, I don't like it, and I don't know why. And that would explain why. Because when you stabilize, the parts you want to come forward visually do. The parts you want to recede into the background stay in the background. The whole thing looks more tailored, finished. That's just a big, important part of it that will set your quilt apart from others. There's no reward for cutting corners that I have found. You may get the price down, but you've sacrificed good design and quality work. And a quilt with more quilting holds up better over time. Okay, so now we have, this quilt is directional, and there are a few gaps. This is the upper right-hand corner, and Look at all that empty, juicy white space in there. Okay, it's not white, but this is a chance to do something a little showy. I don't even remember what I came up with. Okay. Let's do a little feather branch. So I started my stem at the top so that I end up at the bottom. And then start making feathers and see what happens. And when you run out of room, finish the other side of the stem and start at the bottom all over again. It's interesting to see, I don't know that I could fully explain this, how to make the whole thing fit together and be cohesive and look like it was well thought out. And I don't know, more often than not, it just kind of works out. You just think of ways to get it to fit together, and it does. I guess a flower could have been quilted in there, a star. This was the easiest thing, probably with a fairly decent payoff. I think that's gorgeous. And you could fill it up with all kinds of flourishes or not, and use that ditch to get back to where I need to be and fill in that last little spot. Here is that last pieced border, and I thought, well, let's just do some arcs and make a couple passes and keep it kind of simple. And since all the patches are all different sizes, I was not about to start using a ruler here. This is quick and dirty. So I'm freehanding these. And after a while, it felt pretty uncomfortable because when I got to a really long patch, it was starting to look strange to me. But whatever. In the end, I think it turned out fine. For the really long patches, I made 2 arcs, and that seemed to fix that problem. And then when I got to the corner, it was like I didn't know how to quilt. So, I mean, it was really strange. I still have that feeling, like I did 6 months ago when this long arm was brand new. Like I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So the quilting in this border looks a little bit wobbly in places. It ain't great. This is not show quilting, but it's fine. It looks really cute, actually. This would have been so much better with double or triple lines. There's a million variations to this set of arcs. You can make them, you know, in graduated sizes, and they look like they're twisted, and yeah. But these patches aren't very big, and one line a piece was going to be just fine.
Here is the back of the quilt. Normally you would get a lovely whole cloth effect using a light or a dark solid fabric for backing. That's not exactly what we have here. It looks okay, but without dense background quilting to really make some of this stuff pop, it's not gonna pop. And there isn't anything wrong with that. It just isn't as dramatic an effect as might be achieved with some more intricate quilting. But it's still really gorgeous. And that is that project all wrapped up. Thanks so much for watching.